The first thing he noticed was the quiet. Not the dead, empty quiet of a bachelor's apartment, but a managed, humming quiet. The sound of a world already put in order while he slept. Sunlight, filtered through the expensive blinds he'd had installed last year, cut precise stripes across the Egyptian cotton sheets. The other side of the bed was cool to the touch, the pillow plumped and perfect, as if it had only ever been for decoration. Arthur swung his legs over the side of the bed. No clothes on the floor, no stray glass from the night before. Just the clean, faint scent of lemon polish and the richer, darker promise of coffee brewing. He padded barefoot out of the bedroom, the hardwood cool and spotless under his feet. There she was, Lyra. She was in the kitchen, already dressed in simple gray leggings and a plain black t-shirt, her hair tied back in a neat, functional ponytail. She wasn't cooking or cleaning in that moment, but standing perfectly still, wiping an invisible smudge from the already gleaming chrome of the refrigerator door with a microfiber cloth. It was the kind of focused, unnecessary perfection that was her signature. She heard his footsteps and turned, the professional stillness breaking into a smile that was, for him, the real sunrise. "Good morning, Art." Her voice was soft, with the gentle lilt he found so calming. "Morning," he said, his own voice thick with sleep. "You didn't have to get up." "I like to," she said, turning her attention from the refrigerator to him. She gestured with her head toward the counter, and there it was, the blue ceramic mug, the one he'd bought from a potter in a small coastal town years ago. It was heavy, imperfect, with a thumbprint fired into the glaze near the handle. It was the only object in the entire minimalist apartment that held any real history for him, and every morning it was waiting, filled with a splash of oat milk sitting on a small cork coaster, his anchor. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He inhaled her scent, that clean soap and water smell, so different from the cloying perfumes of the women he used to date. She was warm and solid in his arms. For a fraction of a second, he felt her muscles tense, a barely perceptible stiffening, before she relaxed into his embrace, leaning her head back against his. "You spoil me," he murmured into her hair. "It's nothing," she said, her hands coming up to rest on his forearms. "Do you want eggs?" "I want you to come back to bed." A small, quiet laugh. "The day is already started. I have to do the marketing, and your dry cleaning is ready." Her phone, lying face down on the granite countertop, gave a sudden, sharp buzz. It sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. Lyra's eyes flicked toward it. A tiny furrow appeared between her brows, a minuscule break in the placid surface he so admired. It was there and gone in an instant, smoothed away by the smile she turned up to him. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Of course," she said, her voice perfectly even. "It is just my sister, asking for money again." She rolled her eyes in a pantomime of exasperation that felt both practiced and genuine. "Ah," he let it go. It was part of the background noise he'd accepted, the vague, distant ecosystem of family and need that she managed as efficiently as she managed his household. He released her and picked up the mug. The coffee was the perfect temperature, the taste familiar, grounding. He took a sip, the warmth spreading through his chest, and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was it, the ultimate life hack. No drama, no games, just a seamless, supportive partnership. He leaned against the counter, watching as she folded the microfiber cloth into a perfect square and placed it by the sink. Her movements were economical, graceful. She was a beautiful, comforting piece of the beautiful, comforting world he had built. He had no idea what the message on her phone really said, and it didn't occur to him that he should. The illusion of perfection held for weeks. Arthur's life ran on an exquisitely tuned engine, and Lyra was its ghost in the machine. He'd work, and a plate of food would appear, cut fruit and a glass of iced tea, arranged on a tray with the precision of a still life painting. His friends would come over for a poker night, and she would be an invisible presence, emptying ashtrays and refilling glasses, her smile a polite, professional shield. "Dude, you are living the dream," his friend Mark had slurred, watching Lyra clear away a mountain of beer bottles and chip bags without a word. Arthur had just smiled, a deep, proprietary satisfaction settling in his gut. The first crack was a sound, a laugh. He was in his home office, deep into a quarterly report, when he heard it from the living room. It wasn't her quiet, polite chuckle. This was a full, throaty laugh, a burst of uninhibited joy. It was a sound he'd never heard from her before, and it was so alien it pulled him from his spreadsheet. He walked out to see her sitting on the floor, cross-legged, on a video call. Her back was to him, and she was speaking Tagalog, her voice animated, her hands gesturing wildly. She laughed again, and for a split second, Arthur felt like an intruder in his own home. He saw the corner of the tablet screen, a man's face, young, smiling back at her. As if she could feel his presence, Lyra's shoulders stiffened. The flow of her conversation faltered. She glanced over her shoulder, and the vibrant, laughing woman vanished. "Art," she said, her face instantly reassembling into its familiar, placid mask. She said a few quick, clipped words into the tablet and ended the call, the man's face blinking out of existence. "I'm sorry, was I being too loud?" "No, not at all," he said, forcing a casual tone. "Who was that?" "My cousin," she said, not quite meeting his eye as she stood up. "He is very silly." She began to fold the throw blanket on the sofa, a sudden, intense focus on a task that didn't need doing. The energy in the room had changed. The warm, open joy was gone, replaced by the cool, efficient hum of his household manager. Later that week, he came home to find her crying. It was a silent, controlled crying, her shoulders shaking as she stood over the sink, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. The sight of it was a punch to the gut. He rushed over, putting his hands on her arms. "Lyra, what is it? What's wrong?" She flinched. It was barely perceptible, a tremor of resistance under his touch, but he felt it. She quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and forced a watery smile. "It's nothing, Art. It's stupid. My mother, she is sick again." "Sick? How sick? We can send money, whatever she needs," he said, pulling out the only tool he had. "No, no," she said, shaking her head, pulling away from him to turn off the tap. "It is not the money, it is just family drama. You don't need to worry about it." She looked exhausted, the skin under her eyes shadowed. She looked past him, as if he weren't there. "I'll make dinner now." The subject was closed. She was already measuring out rice, her movements mechanical, the brief, raw emotion locked away again. He found himself watching her. He'd notice her phone in her hand constantly, the screen angled away from him, her thumb scrolling endlessly. One night, as she slept, it lit up on the nightstand. A message preview flashed on the screen. It wasn't in English, and the name wasn't sister or cousin. It was a man's name, Paolo. The message was short, just a few words he couldn't understand, followed by a string of heart emojis. Arthur lay in the dark, the filtered moonlight tracing the same stripes across the bed as it did every morning. But now, the quiet of the room felt different. It was no longer a peaceful, managed quiet. It felt heavy, filled with the static of unspoken words and a life being lived just beneath the surface of his own. The cool, empty space on the other side of the bed suddenly seemed like a vast, unbridgeable distance. He didn't feel like he was living a dream. He felt like he had been sleeping through one. The confrontation wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was as quiet and controlled as everything else in the apartment. He waited until morning. She had placed his blue mug on the coaster, a perfect little ritual, and as she turned to face him, he held up her phone, which he had taken from her nightstand. "Paolo," he said, the name sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "Who is Paolo?" For the first time, she didn't try to smile it away. The mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The exhaustion he had seen glimpses of now consumed her face, pulling at the corners of her eyes and mouth. She looked at the phone in his hand, then back at him, and her expression was not one of guilt, but of profound, soul-crushing weariness. "He is my husband," she said. The words hung in the air, simple, declarative, and utterly devastating. Arthur felt a strange, detached sensation, as if the floor had dropped away, but he was still standing. "You're... what? You told me you weren't married." A small, bitter laugh escaped her lips, the first truly genuine sound he'd heard from her that morning. "I am a helper, Art. There is a box I check on a form. Unmarried. No dependents. It makes the visa easier. It makes the job easier." "The job?" he repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Lyra, we sleep in the same bed." "Yes," she said, her voice flat. She finally looked him directly in the eye, and there was no deference, no warmth, no affection. There was only a vast, empty space where he thought a person had been. "That is part of the job." It was then he understood. The smiles, the perfect coffee, the way she leaned back into his embrace, the preemptive plumping of the pillow, it was all work. It was an extension of wiping invisible smudges from the refrigerator. It was the highest level of service, a complete immersive management of his reality. He thought he had bypassed the messiness of dating, but he had only subcontracted the emotional labor to someone whose livelihood depended on her performance. The money he gave her, the family drama she managed, it was all flowing back to a life he was not a part of, to a husband and a family he had enabled her to support by making her his live-in ghost. "So, all of it," he started, but couldn't finish. "It was just... for money?" She picked up the microfiber cloth from beside the sink and began to fold it, her movements precise, automatic. "My daughter has a bad tooth. The dentist is very expensive," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't an excuse or a justification. It was a weather report, a simple statement of fact. He stood there in the sterile perfection of his kitchen, the smell of lemon polish in the air, and felt the full, crushing weight of his delusion. He hadn't found a partner. He had purchased a service. He had mistaken her desperation for affection, her diligence for devotion. He looked at the woman standing before him, a stranger with a husband and a daughter and a life that was a universe away, and realized he had never seen her at all. He had only ever seen a reflection of his own desires, a beautifully maintained surface. And the silence she left behind when she finally walked out, leaving the blue mug clean and empty on the counter, was the loudest sound he had ever heard. He didn't move. The silence that flooded the room wasn't the peaceful, managed quiet he had come to cherish. It was the original silence, the one he had hired her to vanquish. It was the sterile, echoing quiet of an empty stage after the play is over. He walked through the apartment, his bare feet making no sound on the spotless floor. Every object was a testament to her labor. The perfectly folded throw on the sofa, the remote controls aligned on the coffee table, the invisible sheen on the windows. These weren't the artifacts of a shared life. They were the meticulously executed tasks of a highly competent professional. He had mistaken performance for affection. He had confused service with intimacy. The morning coffee, the anticipatory smile, the feigned exasperation at her sister. It was all part of the job description he had written for her. a role she played with Oscar-worthy skill because her daughter had a bad tooth. He hadn't bypassed the messy game of dating. He had simply paid to have his side of the board played for him. He wanted the prize of a loving partner without the effort of being one. He hadn't been her lover. He had been a line item in her budget, a long-term, high-yield client. The thought didn't make him angry. It hollowed him out. He had built a world so insulated, so perfectly curated to his own comfort, that there was no room for another person in it, only an employee. He had traded the chaotic, unpredictable, terrifyingly real prospect of human connection for the quiet, clean, and ultimately empty perfection of a well-run home. He stood in front of the chrome refrigerator, the surface so clean it was a dark mirror. He saw his own reflection, a blurry figure in the dim morning light. He had wanted a life without complications. He had it. The game wasn't about love or loneliness. It was about power. And in the end, all his power had bought him was this: a perfect, silent room where he was completely and finally alone with the man who had paid for it all.